My name is Eleanor Harris. I am 72 years old, a widow, and for most of my life I believed that the walls of a home could hold together the love of a family. I worked 3 decades as a night nurse at a small hospital in Charleston, South Carolina. Every dollar I saved went into one thing, a modest white clapboard house with a front porch and a little rose garden. That house was my dream, my safe harbor, and the one place I thought would always welcome me. Before we dive into family betrayal, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. But one evening, as the cicadas buzzed outside and the smell of cornbread still lingered in the kitchen, I heard words I never imagined would come from my own child. My daughter Rachel, standing at the head of the dining table, her face red with anger, pointed at me and shouted, "This is my house now, Mom. If you can't live by my rules, then you should leave." The room went silent. My fork froze in midair. I remember staring at her, trying to recognize the little girl I had once carried on my hip, the teenager I had sat up with during long nights of heartbreak, the woman I had trusted with everything I owned. But she wasn't there. All I saw was someone who no longer wanted me in the very home I had built with my bare hands. Neighbors sometimes say Charleston has two faces, the gentle charm of pastel houses and church bells, and the darker truth that families can break apart behind closed shutters. That night, I saw the darker side. I picked up my worn leather bag, the same one I had carried to work every shift for years, and I walked out into the humid night without saying a word. Now let me ask you, what would you do if your own child told you to leave the house you had worked your whole life to build? Would you fight? Would you cry? Or would you simply walk away like I did? Here's the twist. Only 3 days later, that same daughter who told me I no longer belonged came knocking, her eyes swollen with tears, her voice trembling, begging me for help. Life has a way of turning the table faster than we ever expect. Friends, before I tell you how everything unfolded, I want you to pause for a moment. Think about your own family. Has anger ever pushed you to say something you later regretted? Has pride ever made you forget the sacrifices your parents made for you? If you're listening to my story right now, I would love for you to leave a comment. If one day your child or parent forced you out of your own home, what would you do? And while you're here, please subscribe so you won't miss the rest of this journey, because what happened after those 3 days will shock you as much as it shocked me. I did not become the kind of mother who gets shown the door overnight. That sort of thing never grows out of a single argument. It grows out of years of small choices and bigger pains that nobody quite knows how to hold. If you had met me 10 years ago, you would have said I was one of those women who could carry a whole family on her back and still bring a pie to the church supper on Sunday. I wore white shoes and a blue cardigan to the night shift at the county hospital, and I kept peppermints in my pocket for nervous patients. People used to tell me I had calm hands. They never saw how those hands trembled just a little when I came home at dawn and unlocked the door, wondering if I was doing enough. The house on our little street in Charleston did not appear out of thin air. It came from double shifts and packed lunches and the quiet decision to go without new things year after year. After my husband Thomas died in a rain-slick accident on the highway, I made a promise to myself that our daughters would not feel the ground crack open beneath them. I told them we would stay in the house we were renting until I could buy it, and that I would find a way to make it a place that felt steady. I remember counting tips from a part-time cafeteria job at the hospital and setting them inside a coffee can labeled Future. When I finally signed the papers, the realtor shook my hand like I had just conquered a mountain. Maybe I had. The paint was chipped and the porch rail leaned to one side, but it was ours. I planted roses out front because my mother always said roses teach you that beauty comes with thorns, and you have to love both. Rachel was my youngest. She was the baby who slept on my chest through those first months when I did not know how to be a widow yet. As she grew, she was quick and clever, the kind of child who finished puzzles faster than anyone else. I bragged about her to anyone who would listen. She got her first job at a small bank downtown, answering phones and learning the language of accounts and transfers and interest rates. I told everyone at church that my girl was building a future, and they smiled and clapped me on the shoulder like they had a share in it. Our summers ran on simple things. We would sit on the porch with a bowl of peaches and watch the evening turn the sky the color of apricots. I would show Rachel how to deadhead the roses, where to cut so the bush would bloom again, and she would roll her eyes and say she already knew. But then she would do it exactly the way I showed her. When she brought home her first paycheck, she waved the envelope like a pennant and said, "Mom, we are going to make this place shine." We painted the porch rail white that weekend and laughed when we both ended up with more paint on our arms than on the wood. I had an older daughter too, Julia, who married a Coast Guard officer and moved up to Virginia. She and I talked often enough, a steady kind of love. Her life took her out of Charleston, but she called on Sundays and came down for Christmas when she could. There was never any big rift between us, just that distance life brings when children build their own homes in other towns. We were fine. We were more than fine. It was with Rachel that things felt braided tighter. When Rachel turned 30, she asked to take over more responsibilities around the house. She wanted to handle the utility bills and the taxes, wanted to set up auto pay, and tidy up what she called the back end. I am not ashamed to say I was relieved. I grew up when you kept your bills in a shoebox and drove them to the office yourself. Rachel had an app for everything. It made her feel competent, and it made me feel cared for. That is how it starts, you see. You let someone help, and then the helping becomes the way of things. I told myself I was doing the wise thing when I signed over the deed to her name 2 summers ago. Her bank had started talking to her about a management training program, and she said it would look better on paper if she had home ownership history. The plan, as she explained it, was to give her leverage for a better rate on a small investment property someday. She promised to keep me in the house as long as I lived. I did not ask for a lawyer to sit at the table. I did not know which questions to ask. I believed a promise from my child was stronger than any legal paper. The day I signed, Pastor John from the little brick church on Rutledge Avenue stopped by with a mason jar of fig preserves. He has one of those slow voices that make you pay attention. He sat at my kitchen table and asked if I felt sure. I told him a mother lives for the day her children stand on their own 2 feet. He nodded. And then, like he was just thinking out loud, he said that the church kept a fireproof box for members who wanted an extra copy of important documents. "Save a copy of whatever you sign, Eleanor," he said. "No harm in having a spare tucked away." I smiled and told him I would bring by whatever the notary gave me. Looking back, I see now that the Lord sometimes puts small hedges in our path long before we know we need them. My next-door neighbor, Martha Jenkins, could read a person the way a librarian reads a card catalog. She had been a school librarian for decades and had a gentle way of asking if you had eaten when what she really meant was, "I am worried about you." She watched over me when I worked nights, kept an eye on the porch, brought in the mail. After Thomas died, she and I learned to fill quiet evenings with small comforts. A jigsaw puzzle spread across my dining table. Shared pots of soup. I did not realize how much I depended on that easy friendship until the night I carried my bag down the front steps in a hurry and her porch light flicked on like she had been waiting for me to need it. There were warning signs before that night. They always seem obvious afterward, but at the time they register as little shifts, nothing more. Rachel started staying late at the bank, and when she came home she was tired in a way that made her sharp around the edges. She wanted more quiet, more order, more say. I told myself it was the strain of responsibility. She wanted the house to look a certain way. She packed up the mismatched mugs I had collected over the years and replaced them with a set of plain white cups she said looked clean. She moved my sewing basket to a closet because the threads looked messy. She meant well. That is the phrase I kept repeating like a prayer I did not quite believe. She meant well. I did not understand how complicated her work had become. She talked about audits and compliance and risk reviews, things that made my head feel stuffed with cotton. I understood people. I understood a patient's breath easing when you found the vein on the first try. I did not understand spreadsheets and systems. Rachel did. I leaned on her understanding, and she leaned on my faith. In the middle of all that, a man drifted into her life the way a storm sidles up on a summer afternoon. Warm air, rising clouds building slowly. She met him at a fundraising event the bank hosted for a local charity. His name was Ethan Miller. He had a smile that showed teeth and eyes that did not quite meet yours. He made jokes I did not find funny, and he laughed before the punchline. We had him to dinner once, and he brought a bottle of wine with a label I could not pronounce, and spoke about opportunity as if it were a person he intended to charm. Rachel glowed when he gave his opinions. I boiled noodles and reminded myself not to judge. I told myself that a mother's caution can sometimes sound like jealousy, and I did not want to be the woman who could not let go. The house did what houses do. It held the weather and the memories and the small frictions of daily life. The porch creaked where we always meant to fix it. The roses bloomed, and then they did not, and then they did again. I worked fewer shifts and took longer walks. On Saturday mornings, I wiped down the banister and counted blessings. When Rachel asked if she could host a few colleagues for dinner, I set out the good napkins and made my mother's chicken and rice. I thought that hospitality might soften whatever hard thing was growing between us, but hospitality cannot cover what pride uncovers. There were nights I heard Rachel on the phone in her bedroom, her voice low and tight, and my name would float down the hallway in a tone I did not recognize. When I would ask in the morning if she wanted coffee, she would say she needed space and that I took things too personally. I tried not to take it personally. It was my home. It was our home. It was her home. The words slid over each other in my mind like mismatched stones. There is a way that love changes shape when children grow into their own lives. A mother learns to step back, to let advice become suggestion, to let suggestion become silence. I practiced that quiet every day. I told myself that respect sometimes looks like letting your child run her own kitchen. I reminded myself that my mother had not liked all the ways I ran mine, and we survived that too. I thought of Pastor John's sermons about humility, how it is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. I put my sewing basket back in the closet and shrugged when my favorite mugs disappeared into a donation box. I tried to let the house evolve with the woman my daughter was becoming. There is something else I need to say here because it matters to the story that followed. I have always believed in the dignity of work and in the habit of gratitude. I kept a list by my bed. Every night I wrote down 3 things I was thankful for. On the evening I signed the deed to Rachel, my list said 1, a daughter with a future, 2, a roof that does not leak, 3, a God who steadies me. I did not write down doubt. I would not have admitted it even to myself. But I felt it the way you feel a storm far off, a pressure behind your eyes. You might ask why I did not talk more with Julia about any of this. Distance is a strange thing. We spoke about her boys and their school projects and the price of groceries. I did not want to worry her. I told her the house was humming along and that Rachel had good news at work. Julia told me to come visit, and I said I would after the holidays. We were both telling the truth we could handle. All this is to say that by the time that evening came, when Rachel stood at the end of the table and told me to leave, the ground had already shifted. It is important to understand the ground that shifts before you judge the fall. I was not a saint, only a mother, who wanted to believe that trust can tie up the loose ends life leaves. And I suppose I believed that the home I built would keep believing in me, even if the people inside it forgot how it was made. Martha always says that a house has a memory. She says it absorbs the sound of your prayers and hands them back in the quiet. The night I left, I touched the doorframe on my way out, the way a sailor touches the ship's wheel asking for safe passage. I did not know where I would sleep. I knew only that the porch light next door would be on, because Martha leaves it on for strays and for friends, and I have been both in my life. If you are still with me, you know I did not come to that moment empty-handed. I had a church with a fireproof box and a pastor with long patience. I had a neighbor who kept soup in her freezer and keys on a hook by the door. I had a house that remembered me, even if my name was not the only one on the papers. All of that would matter soon. I did not yet know how much. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. It was not one fight that split the seams open. It was a slow build, like a kettle left on the stove, hissing louder each day until it finally whistled so sharp you could not ignore it. After Rachel began seeing Ethan Miller, the mood in the house changed. Ethan had charm, the way ivy has green leaves. It looked pleasant enough, but it clung and spread where it should not. He started coming around more often, bringing takeout boxes instead of eating the food I cooked. He made little jokes about upgrading the house and moving to a neighborhood more suited for success. I kept quiet, though my stomach tightened every time he brushed aside Rachel's laughter with a smug grin. Rachel used to tell me everything, but little by little her words thinned out. She came home late saying the bank needed her for extra audits. Her phone calls turned secretive. She would step onto the porch even in the cold and speak low into the receiver. Sometimes I would hear my name slip through her voice, sharp as a thorn, and I knew the conversation was about me. One Friday night she came home later than usual. I was knitting in the living room when she walked in. Her face tired but wired, as if she had been running on coffee and adrenaline. Ethan followed behind her, carrying a bottle of red wine. "Mom," she said, not meeting my eyes, "Ethan's going to stay for dinner. We'll order something. Don't fuss." I nodded, though something inside me folded. That was the beginning of being treated like an extra in my own story. As the weeks passed, Ethan's presence grew heavier. He started hinting about investments and real estate opportunities. He asked Rachel questions about the house, about the deed. When I reminded him that the house had been mine long before, he smiled with that slick politeness that made me feel like I was being handled. Then came the evening that broke the fragile thread. It was a simple dinner, chicken and rice, a meal I had made 100 times before. Rachel was scrolling on her phone while Ethan bragged about some big move he was planning at work. I asked Rachel if she wanted me to pack lunch for her next day. She snapped her head up and said, "Stop treating me like a child. This is my house now, and I will live how I want." Ethan leaned back in his chair smirking, and Rachel's voice rose higher. "If you can't respect me, maybe you should leave. Maybe it's time you realize you don't run this place anymore." Her words struck harder than any storm. My fork clattered against the plate. I saw Ethan watching, waiting, almost enjoying the show. I wanted to shout, to slam my hand against the table to remind her that without me there would be no roof over her head. But instead I stood, slowly, went to my room and packed a small bag. When I came down the stairs, Rachel's face flickered with something fear, regret, but she did not stop me. Ethan poured himself another glass of wine. I walked out into the night air, heavy and wet, and crossed the yard to Martha Jenkins's porch. She opened her door before I even knocked. "Come in, Eleanor," she said softly, her voice steady like a hand on the shoulder. "You're not sleeping alone tonight." For the next few days I stayed with Martha. She made soup, set out an extra quilt on the couch, and pretended not to notice when I cried into my tea. She listened when I said I felt like a stranger in my own family, and she told me something I will never forget. Sometimes love makes us blind to what's right in front of us, but truth has a way of showing itself, and truth did come. On the second day, Martha's niece who worked at the courthouse mentioned in passing that Ethan's name had shown up in an old fraud case. He had been accused of embezzling from a small business partner, though the charges had quietly disappeared. My heart sank. Rachel had no idea. She thought she had found a man who could help her climb higher, when in reality he was dragging her into quicksand. On the third morning, as I sat at Martha's kitchen table with a cup of coffee, my phone rang. It was Rachel. Her voice was trembling. "Mom, please, I need you. Something's happened. She told me the bank had launched an investigation. Funds were missing, documents had her name on them, and Ethan was nowhere to be found. Her coworkers had turned cold. Her supervisor suspended her, and even her closest friend refused to take her calls. She was alone." I listened quietly. My heart was heavy with both sorrow and a strange, sharp clarity. The same daughter who had ordered me out of my home was now begging me to come back. Life had spun the wheel, and suddenly she was the one shut out in the cold. "Mom, I'm sorry," she whispered through sobs. "I don't have anyone else. Please help me." I looked at Martha, who gave me a silent nod. I thought of Pastor John and the copy of the deed he had tucked away in the church's fireproof box. I thought of my roses still blooming in the yard of a house I had not slept in for 3 nights. And in that moment, I knew the story was not over. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. When Rachel's call came, I was sitting on Martha's porch, the air heavy with the scent of magnolia. Her voice cracked through the line like glass shattering. "Mom, please. I don't know what to do. Ethan is gone. The bank says I'm responsible for missing funds. They've suspended me. Everyone's turned their back on me. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of my grown daughter sobbing like a child again. For 3 days I had replayed her words, "This is my house now, Mom. If you can't live by my rules, then you should leave." Now those words felt like a knife she wished she could pull back. "Rachel," I said slowly, "where are you?" "I'm at the house," she whispered. "Please come home." Home. The word twisted in my chest. It was the place I had been told no longer belonged to me, yet something inside me knew it was time to face it. I walked back to that white clapboard house as evening settled in. The porch light was on, casting a tired glow on the chipped rail we once painted together. Rachel opened the door, her eyes swollen red, her hands trembling. She fell into my arms without hesitation. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she cried. "I thought I was strong enough. I thought Ethan loved me. I thought pushing you away would make me independent. But now I have nothing." I held her, but my eyes caught something behind her on the table, a stack of papers from the bank, letters marked urgent numbers circled in red ink. Ethan's handwriting scrawled across one page, a promise of quick returns that now looked like a cruel joke. "Sit down," I said, guiding her to the couch. For the first time in years, she looked at me, not as an obstacle, but as her mother, the one who might still know how to steady a sinking ship. Here is where the twist comes in. Months earlier, when I had signed the deed over, Pastor John had quietly insisted on keeping a copy in the church's fireproof box. No harm in having a backup, he had said. That copy showed something Rachel and Ethan had overlooked. The deed listed me as a co-owner. I had never relinquished all my rights. I went to the small safe in my bedroom closet and pulled out my folder of old papers. Nestled among them was a note from Pastor John, reminding me that he still had the duplicate. Holding it in my hands felt like holding a lifeline. Rachel stared at me, confused. "What is that?" "It means, Rachel," I said gently, "that Ethan cannot use this house to cover his mess. You signed papers with him, but he forgot about me. This home still belongs to both of us." She blinked, the weight of those words sinking in. Relief and shame washed over her face in equal measure. The next morning I called Pastor John and asked him to meet us. He arrived with his weathered briefcase, sat at the kitchen table, and spread out the documents. His calm voice filled the room. "Rachel, your mother's rights have not been erased. Ethan may have convinced you otherwise, but this house cannot be leveraged or sold without her consent. The law is clear." Rachel buried her face in her hands. "I didn't know. I thought—" Pastor John placed a hand on her shoulder. "Daughter pride can blind us, but truth has a way of finding its way to light." Later that day, news broke that Ethan had emptied his accounts and vanished. A warrant was issued, but no one knew where he had gone. Rachel's co-workers turned icy. Her suspension turned into the threat of dismissal. For the first time, she saw the cost of the man she had trusted. But in that same house she had tried to claim as hers alone, she also saw the mother who had not abandoned her. "Mom," she said quietly that night, "why are you even helping me? After everything I said to you." I looked at her the same way I had when she was a little girl, bringing me wildflowers from the yard. "Because no matter what, Rachel, I am still your mother. And mothers don't stop loving even when their children lose their way." That was the turning point. From then on, Rachel began to see me not as a burden, but as a shield she had nearly cast aside. I accompanied her to meetings with the bank's investigators, carrying the deed that proved Ethan had no legal claim on the house. I watched as her shoulders squared again, slowly, painfully, but with new humility. The woman who had once shouted me out of my own home now leaned on me to keep that very home standing. But let me tell you, friends, this was not just about paperwork. This was about power shifting back to where it belonged, not out of revenge, but out of the truth that had been there all along. That night when Rachel fell asleep on the couch, I walked into the rose garden. The moonlight touched the petals, and I remembered the years of tending, pruning, watering, and believing those roses would bloom again after every storm. I realized then that family works the same way. You cut away what's broken, you endure the thorns, and sometimes after a long winter, you see new blossoms. And so the mother who had been pushed aside became the mother who stood steady once more. The house was not lost. My dignity was not erased. And Rachel, my daughter who had chased pride and nearly drowned in it, was learning at last what it meant to return to the root that had always held her. In the days that followed Ethan's disappearance, life in our house changed in quiet but undeniable ways. Rachel was forced to step back from the bank while the investigation unfolded. Her pride, once so sharp, had been stripped away. I would catch her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her hands, whispering, "How did I let it get this far?" She was a woman who had tasted both the sweetness of ambition and the bitterness of betrayal, and she finally understood the cost. For me, the journey was different. I had carried the wound of my daughter's words, the sting of being told to leave the home I had built with my own hands. That wound was real. But I also carried something heavier, a mother's love that could not simply be set down. I had every right to turn away to say, "You made your bed, now lie in it." But when I looked at her brokenness, I saw not a woman who had betrayed me, but the little girl who once placed dandelions in my hair. The Bible speaks clearly about honoring parents. Honor your father and mother, that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land, Ephesians chapter 6, 2-3. Rachel had forgotten this truth, and the price of forgetting was high. Yet just as the parable of the prodigal son reminds us there is always a way back when humility meets forgiveness. I was no saint, but I knew this much bitterness only multiplies pain, while forgiveness plants seeds of healing. So I forgave her, not because she had earned it, but because love demanded it. Forgiveness does not erase the past, but it loosens the chains that keep us bound to it. One evening as we walked through the rose garden together, Rachel stopped and touched one of the blossoms. "I don't deserve your kindness," she whispered. I placed my hand over hers. "It's not about what you deserve, Rachel. It's about the truth that love always gives us another chance." George Eliot once said, "It is never too late to be what you might have been. You still have time to be the daughter you were meant to be, and I still have time to be the mother who welcomes you home." She began to cry, not the bitter tears of shame, but the cleansing tears of repentance. And in that moment, I felt something lift from my heart. Friends, family betrayal can leave scars deeper than any wound. When someone you love turns their back on you, it feels like the ground disappears beneath your feet. But here is the miracle. Even in betrayal, we can choose how the story ends. We can let anger write the final chapter, or we can choose forgiveness and discover that the ending can also be a new beginning. That house in Charleston did not just stand as wood and stone. It became a symbol of survival of love that endures storms and of forgiveness that restores what pride had broken. Rachel slowly began to rebuild her life. She found a counselor, she started volunteering at the local shelter, and she came back to the church pew she had abandoned years ago. Each step was small, but each step was forward. As for me, I opened the doors of my home in a new way. I invited women from the neighborhood, many of them widows like me, to come on Thursday afternoons for tea and conversation. We shared stories of our struggles, our children, and our faith. The living room that once echoed with arguments now carried the soft murmur of healing voices. It reminded me that home is not just a place, it's the people you love, and the peace you choose to create within its walls. What is done in the dark will be brought to the light. Ethan's lies could not remain hidden forever, but neither could the truth of a mother's love. To you listening now, I want to leave this thought. If you still have your parents, call them tonight. If you still have your children, hug them a little longer. Do not let a careless word or a burst of anger rob you of years you can never get back. Forgive where forgiveness is needed, and honor where honor is due. And I would love to hear from you. Has family betrayal ever touched your life? Did forgiveness play a part in your story? Please share in the comments. Your words may help someone else find their way back home. If this story moved, you take a moment to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. Because here we believe in telling the stories that matter, the stories that remind us of who we are and of who we still have time to become. And remember, as George Eliot said, it is never too late to be what you might have been.